Hello, I'm Vivi, and I am interviewing Tomer, and Tomer is my son Yaakov's very, very, very good friend. They're both at yeshiva together. First time I'm interviewing, I think only the first or second time you've been interviewed, so we're gonna just go for it. So anyway, the reason I wanted to interview you is because I asked my son Yaakov, I said, so was Tomer always observant, like always into his Judaism? And he said, oh, no, not at all. I was really surprised. So I was like, what's his story? And he said, oh, you got to ask him his story. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to ask you your story. You somehow ended up at a yeshiva in Israel, in Jerusalem, studying Judaism, but this was not always how you conducted yourself. So,
So I grew up in a small town called Victorville, California.
And my son says it's the high desert?
Yes, it's the high desert. It's people know it as a gas station between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. It's pretty much in the center.
A gas station between
LA and Vegas.
Okay. Okay. My other son would be really into it. Was he into it when you told him?
Yeah, very much. When I met Zach, he told me, he's like, oh, Victorville, I know where that's. I've seen it on the maps. Like, I'm into geography, so.
Loves geography.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's like, oh, it's in the desert. Is it near this city in this town? He got really into it, very excited. He's like, I never thought I'd meet somebody from Victorville.
I love that. So you grew up in Victorville, very few Jewish people. Your mother, where is she from?
She's from Jerusalem, actually. She was born and raised in Israel.
Okay. Okay, so then you moved there, and you did a little bit of tradition, lit Friday night candles, had some Shabbat dinners, and then you said when you were around what age?
Probably 8 or 9, started to really question it, not really think that it was
8 or 9?
Yeah, it wasn't really so relevant. But I still kept going and doing things that my mother asked me to do. My father was actually invested that we would try and know what it means to be a Jew.
So your father's Jewish?
No, he's not Jewish, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But he wanted you to...
Yeah, it was very important to him, actually, that we had some sort of sense of Jewish identity as well. So my parents were very good at that. I was the one who drifted away on my own in that sense.
That's really neat. That you supported that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I'm very blessed with my parents and who I ended up with.
So 8 or 9, and then when did you say, this isn't for me?
Shortly after my bar mitzvah.
Okay, so...
After, everything was kind of leading up in that direction.
13?
13, yeah. Things, the way that I understood the world, which was very limited to the scope of a 13-year-old. It's not much. But the way that I understood the world and interacted with it, it worked pretty well without God. Like, it didn't make sense. Like, you didn't need a God to make the world work.
Okay, yeah, I think you're very science-oriented, which doesn't mean a person could be very science-oriented and also very, have a lot of faith. But so I think Yaakov said at some point you started to consider yourself an atheist?
Yes. So I didn't really hit the atheism train until I was 17 or 18 when I moved to Israel.
Okay, so you moved to Israel. So what was that?
Yeah, so I didn't want to go to college after high school. I didn't like school. I didn't think it was good. And I realized that I was going to amass a lot of debt by going on to college for something that I wasn't interested in doing and not pursuing a degree that really interested me or seemed really worthwhile. And I always wanted to go into the military. And so there was a period where I was going to join the Marine Corps. And I wanted to do that ever since I was a child. Probably because my father was also a Marine for most of the...
Oh, wow.
That's probably the main motivation, thinking back.
Thank you for his service. Thank him for
Yeah. No, it's my dad's very proud to be a Marine. They all are. It's a calling, really.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And so I knew I wanted to go into the military. I sort of have that sort of need and drive to protect people. Though the job I wanted to do in the Marine Corps would require me to sign up for 8 years.
Oh, wow, 8 years.
Yeah, that's a pretty hefty commitment. And then the summer of my senior year my senior year, the Operation Protective Edge happened in 2014.
The what? The
Operation Protective Edge, the last big war.
Operation Protective Edge in Israel?
Yeah, the last big war with Gaza. So that war took place in 2014. And I remember my family, so my family's obviously Israeli on my mother's side. And we have family friends that are over there, really good family friends at that time. And I remember hearing stories that they're running to bomb shelters, that there's a lot of panic, but there's some sort of sense of camaraderie and solidarity there. My cousin actually lost his best friend in the war as well, and I was looking to do something meaningful and significant with my life as best as I could at that point in my life.
At 17?
Yeah, and I decided, and I figured that, well, if I'm actually looking to do something meaningful, why not go to a place where I have family, where I have friends, and where every single thing that I do actually matters, and I can actually see the effect in that. And so I decided to go outside of myself and give to Israel. I didn't speak the language. I had only visited, every other summer or something whenever they take us for vacation, my parents.
Wow. So you went and joined the IDF.
Yes, everybody in my high school said it was a terrible decision. All my teachers begged me not to do it. My principal begged me not to do it.
Your principal?
Yeah, my principal, she's like, it's a terrible decision. Go to college. And I'm like, no, it's so much debt. I don't even want to do anything with my college degree at this point.
So, okay, so you joined the IDF.
Mm-hmm.
And you were an atheist at this point.
Yes.
Okay, so TOMER. Okay, so now I'm going to leap forward. So you did the military. We're not fascinating. I'd love to hear about that another time. But now,
Yes.
Okay, so look at you. You're dressed in
Some strange,
yeah.
this weird creature called the Baal Tshuva.
Okay,
Somebody-
and what point? I know it. I'm going to back up one moment. At one point, you got a black belt in what was it?
Oh, TFAS.
Oh, okay,
Oh, yeah.
okay, all right. I thought, okay,
Yeah, no, and tomfoolery and shenanigans.
Oh,
That was my
okay,
black belt.
okay. But then you did study martial art. What did you study?
Yeah, so I do. So ever since I was 13, I trained in Muay Thai kickboxing. So it's the Thai style of boxing. So it's known as the art of 8 limbs. You kick with your shins, knees.
Thai style. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm. I know that
Okay.
you and Yakov sometimes spar a lot.
Yeah, and I also do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Brazilian. Oh, I've heard people. I know a lot of people that do it really like
Mhm.
Brazilian.
Oh, it's so much fun. I got bit with a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu bug. It's
You ever teach
chronic.
Yakov any?
We started when I first came to the
Good,
yeshiva.
yeah. Oh.
Mhm.
Okay, so at some point you're atheist, IDF soldier, jiu-jitsu, and forget the other Muay Thai,
Yeah,
and Muay Thai, what is it called?
Muay Thai.
Muay Thai.
Muay Thai's a nice little drink.
Okay, right. Okay, gotta put my mind here. Okay,
Mhm.
so how did you go from that person, and I'm sure you're still the same person, but how'd you go to that person to this young man that's got a long beard and wearing, what are these called, tzitzis?
Yeah,
and
it's it.
Tsitsi, and I know you have a
Strings
lot
that set off the metal detector in airports.
Oh, they
Every
set off
single time.
they set off the metal detector?
Yeah, and they pat you down every single time. They're like, "What are these weird strings attached?"
Yeah.
My mother, she asked me every once in a while, and she's like, "Why aren't you married yet?" I'm like, "Yeah, but nobody wants to marry a man who comes with strings attached." So,
Well, okay, so I'm going to just jump to this. What do these strings signify?
so they represent the 613 mitzvah that
613 mitzvah.
that a man is man and women that we're all obligated in. The thing is though that men, we get distracted very easily, and we constantly need a reminder that there's a God and that He needs things of us. So the strings often act as a reminder of that, what we're supposed to be doing, and to kind of remind us that there's an eye in the sky, that there's a God and that He's looking.
I
that-
love that. I'm going to repeat this: an eye in the sky, and that He's looking,
Yes.
and it reminds you. I
Yeah,
love
the
that.
reason women don't have to wear them though is because they're not as forgetful as men. They have their act together. It's a man who kind of needs to orient himself.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So back to how did this happen?
How did this happen?
And you're wearing a hat, and
Mhm.
you have a kippah under it, and
I hope so. Yeah, okay.
Okay. Yeah. So how did this happen?
That's a loaded question.
Okay. So I
So-
know it's probably a very long story, so I don't know how you'd like to tell it.
I'll try and synthesize a little bit. So, I'm a rather curious person, and one of my orientations is kind of oriented into trying to find out how to do what's best and what's good for people and kind of make the world better around me. And so, as I was going the atheist route, I found two people. I read a book. Well, I found this author named Fyodor Dostoevsky, and he's a 19th century Russian author. And after I found him, I found a man named Jordan Peterson. And and those two people kind of set me straight. So when I was going through my atheism phase for about 10, 11 years, however long that lasted for, I came across a book called Crime and Punishment. And this book, it was in some sense, a representation of the atheism and nihilism and communism, the ideas that were sweeping Russia, that were probably the precursor for the Russian Revolution and when the Bolsheviks and the communists took over. Yeah. And it explored these ideas that if there isn't a God, then anything is really permissible, that you reason yourself into any sort of situation.
You can what?
You can reason yourself into any situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so the protagonist, his name is Raskolnikov, and he finds himself in a situation.
Is this going to be a spoiler? Spoiler alert?
It's like within the first 3 chapters.
Okay,
so
great.
Yeah.
Not that everyone's reading Crime and Punishment, but
yeah, everybody should
Okay.
read the book, but most people
just
don't.
in case you want to read the book, there's no spoiler here. Okay.
I don't
First
know.
3 chapters, fine.
Yeah. So he explores this idea. He's a law student, and he has this notion or idea that in order to make a society a little bit better, that sometimes there's people who, the intelligentsia, the people who are more intellectual, who can be at the forefront of leading society, who need to decide the moral rules and how things are to operate. And so there isn't necessarily intrinsic value to people.
There is what?
Is not an intrinsic value to a person.
That's what he was saying.
Yeah, that's the distillation of the idea.
The character or the writer was saying this?
The character.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so he finds himself a law student, absolutely destitute and poor. Dostoevsky does a great job describing how St. Petersburg is at this point, how impoverished, how destitute the area is, how difficult it is living there. And then he goes on to visit this woman. She's a pawnbroker, and she's the most nasty person that's in the vicinity, in the area. She's very mean, she's very rude, she just hoards everybody's money that she trades, everybody that pawns everything off for her. And she has a sister who's rather intellectually challenged, and she basically has her around in some sort of servitude to her, tormenting her sister.
Okay.
And so I come across this sort of idea, and everybody around him says that this is everybody's in consensus in the city that this is a wretched, terrible person, that there's nothing to do.
Which is the pawnbroker.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that she's just a wretched person. So he thinks to himself, well, why don't I, everybody's in a really bad situation. My sister, myself, her sister, and everybody in society around is tormented by this woman. But if I take her out, if I murder her, I can, take all the money, and my sister doesn't have to prostitute herself to this guy. This woman, I can set her free so that she doesn't become a slave.
But who's this one?
The pawnbroker's sister. She won't be tormented by her sister.
I forgot, because she was tormenting her own sister.
Yeah, and he alleviates this burden on society that people just absolutely don't like.
This is his idea.
Yeah, so he thinks to himself, he can rationally, kind of reasonably, that he can get everything that he wants, and everybody will be better off for it if he commits the crime. So building up, he eventually commits the crime.
He does kill her.
Yeah, he does kill her. And this is sort of indicative, because he had this notion that people don't have intrinsic value, he was able to get himself to a point where he could do that. And I came to a point when I was reading this book.
At that point.
Yeah, but I recognized very quickly, if I thought about it, sat on it, and contemplated it, that my worldview and thought process, take it a couple more steps, give it a couple more years of me thinking about it, going in depth, it wouldn't be so far off for me to get to the same point that he was at.
To think, not to murder.
Not to murder, but that idea that it's a representative, that there's no God, that people don't have intrinsic value. I thought that people had intrinsic value when I was at that point, but I realized I don't believe in God. There's nothing that gives people intrinsic value if that's the case. And so if I go through that point and through all those steps that he went through, that I realized that I was sort of like, where do I get my value system, my structure from, and my ideas? And I'm like, okay, things are kind of set up within our society and structure, our society, our civilization, that was built and found on things that are thousands of years old, like the Bible, and how that is really what influences us, and I'm influenced by those, and I have those moral views and ideals because of this sort of house structure, this society that was born and raised in a certain sense. So I realized that I was basically a flower that was cut off at the stem. So I still had life, but I'm not connected to a source.
Wow.
And so I'm going to dry off, and if I take it far enough, it's eventually going to die out. There's not going to be anything. And so the question, like, because I was listening to a lot of atheists like Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and a lot of their presupposition was that a person, if they just forego this antiquated belief system of God, a person's natural state of being, from what I gathered together, is that the rational thing to do is to work in a communal way, to go for the betterment of society and the people, and that's the best way to move forward. But I realized that wasn't really so obvious. Like, it's just as obvious to work for my self-gratification. Like, what's wrong with me? Doing everything I can to get everything right for myself.
So, okay, so let's see if I understand this. So you're saying their theory, these very well-known atheists.
Yeah, they're brilliant people. But
brilliant people are saying this is a good thing. If we're atheists, we can work for society. We're not going to worry about this God doing things. We are going to take responsibility ourselves, and we're going to make the world better, which seems like an amazing thing.
Yeah.
But what you will realize is that is a possibility. People might go that way, but they're just as likely, maybe even more likely, to go the opposite direction, like there's no God. So I'm just going to do whatever I can to make my life better and take as much as you realize that it's just as likely to happen. Yeah,
like if people don't have intrinsic value, what's so wrong with me getting everything that I want and taking advantage of you so I can get everything that I want?
If people don't have intrinsic value.
Yeah, at every single moment that I possibly can. Like,
because you realize that could go down a really bad path.
I just realized that I was cut off at the source.
You were cut off at the source.
Yes.
That's so awesome. So you believe you were cut off at the source because these ancient writings are what formed the basis of the beliefs you have, which is to be a good person, to be a moral person, to be kind to your neighbor, to not murder.
Yeah.
To
yeah, like where do I have these values from? Like, it's not so obvious that these values exist. Like, our society is so complex.
And you realize your values actually came from these ancient sources like the Bible.
I hadn't gone to that point yet, but I recognize that the Bible is the most influential source in all of Western literature. Like, everything sources back to the Bible, so that's where the value system and structure.
So what source did you feel cut off from then? Which
God.
Was
well, like that sort of. I'm speaking about it in hindsight.
Right.
Yeah, being cut off at the source. Back then, I didn't necessarily see it that way.
Okay.
What got me to see like a few things in the value of like turning towards God was that there's this character in the book named Sonia. She's a deeply devout Christian.
My mother's name.
Yeah, she's my favorite character in the book. So throughout this novel, it's a pretty dark novel. Like, he's trying to take everything very seriously. Russia in the 1860s, 70s, 80s wasn't a very pleasant place to be at all for a person. But in this book, there's like little glimmers of light that take place, and a lot of them that I connected and related to were from Sonia, this deeply religious woman who seemed to align more with my value system that I had, even though I didn't believe in God. And so she's basically the character that opened me up to that idea. And then I found this guy named Jordan Peterson, who's a professor of psychology.
Just pause a second. It's interesting because now I've fallen in love with being Jewish myself, and I also was not at all into my Judaism and God, but it was a Christian woman that actually really helped me find my way to love God.
Yes.
And then to start to open up my mind to Judaism. And now I love Judaism, but it's interesting that the parallel between us.
Yeah, that's awesome. I should note, Dostoevsky himself is, as far as I know, a religious Eastern Orthodox Christian guy.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so Sonia is the one who kind of opened up my opinion, or like opened up my eyes to having the similar value system that I found myself having, even though I was cut off and I was more like Raskolnikov.
Wow.
So so it was very complex, and so I had to reorient and deal with that and figure out why that was.
So, all right, so now I see how you started to question your whole way of looking at the world.
It was very painful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so I think it was Nietzsche who wrote that. I think it was very painful. Nietzsche, yeah. The German philosopher. He was kind of writing around the same time as Dostoevsky, actually. And one of the things that he comments, I can't remember where, this is terrible. Anyway, so one of the synthesis of that point is that thinking is very painful.
Is what?
Thinking is a very painful process.
Thinking is very painful.
And when you think about it superficially, it doesn't really make much sense, because you and I are thinking right now, engaging in conversation, we have to think to make it happen. So what's really painful, that it's pretty easy going. But when you actually think deeply about something, you come across an idea, and a person is very complex. They have their worldview, their structure, how they orient themselves and act within the world. And when you get introduced to an idea that makes you think or realize that a certain part of your worldview is wrong,
Okay.
You-
You have
you
to
said-
question and
you have to start thinking like, okay, I was wrong about that, and you can stop there and be like, okay, like, so I was wrong about that thing, but not touch anything else. But if you really want to think about it, like, okay, I was wrong here, and that means that this thing that I thought was right is now wrong. And that affects how I view the world in many different dimensions.
domino effect in
Yeah.
different directions.
Yeah, and then you end up not being the same person that you were before because everything that you thought before was, for me at least, 95% wrong or didn't seem like the correct way of orienting myself with the world
Wow.
philosophically and
It was
intellectually
very brave
thinking.
of you.
Yeah, it's terrible. I'm going through the same thing again in
Oh,
Judaism.
really?
Yeah.
Oh.
No, it's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so now, thank you. This is, so fascinating. So we're going to go. So now you have reorientation of the world, atheist, no God, let me question everything.
Yeah, I have to re-question everything again.
Well, I'm going to say now, but before we get there, how did you go from there to Judaism? Because that's not an automatic jump.
No, not
Like,
at all.
I believed in God before I got into Judaism.
Mhm.
I mean, I could just believe in God and be, so how did that happen?
So there's this man named Jordan Peterson. Hopefully your viewers don't like him. He seems to get maligned every once in a while. But he did this thing called he has a biblical series where he takes apart the books in Genesis and really gets down to the bottom, at least attempts to get down to the bottom of things, question things, kind of go through a thought process and figure out what's actually happening being said from a psychological perspective. And when he was going through each story, I happened to just discover him. Like, it happened on a recommended YouTube video, actually. It's very interesting. God works in fascinating ways. I was watching this and I realized, as he's explaining everything that's happening in these biblical stories, that I threw the baby out with the bathwater, that there's a lot of value here. I've read through the Torah.
Value in the Bible and the Torah.
Yeah, in the Bible. I read through it, but I read through it through an atheist perspective, and so like, okay, this is a bunch of garbage. There's like murders going on, war, deceit.
A lot of brother fighting.
And fighting. I'm like, this is Judaism. This is God. I'm like, well, I can't really be upset with God. There's no God. I don't believe in God.
And
so
what?
I'm like, at first I was, my gut reaction was like, I should be upset with God that this is the way that is. I'm like, wait, there's no God. I don't believe in God. God forbid. But I don't believe in God, so why am I upset? Yeah, so why can't I'm not going to be upset with God. I can't be upset with him.
And be upset with something that doesn't exist,
Yeah.
which is how you viewed the world.
Yeah, something that's rather rational and not logical. But like, these texts seem rather destructive and not good themselves.
Which
And
types?
the text, the Jewish
Okay,
text,
got it.
like the
Mhm.
what would be referred to as the Hebrew Bible. And I came to realize that it's just a perversion of what Judaism has to say and what these texts actually have to say.
Your thinking was a perversion of it, or is that what you're saying?
The thinking of the worldview that I oriented myself in and from understanding it. And so when he went through these texts, he brought so much depth and life and richness to them that I realized that were more in line with values that I had been trying to develop with myself and figure out, because my intention and purpose was to always make the world a better place and go through that. And these were more in line with that. And I grew up around Christians and Catholics, but I knew that I was Jewish.
Wait, you knew what?
I knew that I was Jewish. Like, that's just from the few things that we did as a child that my parents instilled that I should continue being Jewish. I'm learning Judaism from this guy who's a Christian. He's a psychologist. So it's like, okay, so now there's a better appreciation. I think that this stuff is actually true.
So interesting. Again, that was my orientation too, was
Mhm.
learning to open my mind to Judaism through a Christian friend.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank God. It's
And thank you to my friend.
yeah, definitely. God bless her.
Thank you. Yeah.
So that's kind of what opened up me to realizing that I threw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of value here. I was right in my analysis that all the values that we have, especially particularly pertaining to literature, how it's sourced, and I think the Bible is probably the most referenced source in literature, and so it has a lot of influence. And I was right that there's a lot of good values in here, and I just had to learn to piece through it and actually have a more critical and open approach to it.
So I've never heard anybody say they got into God and religion and by Dostoevsky. How do you pronounce it?
Dostoevsky.
I'm just gonna let you say it.
Okay.
And Jordan Peterson. So
Yeah.
So now I want to
We're not gonna
jump
talk about
to
it.
the last point. Is okay. So now you're open to religion, but you're not just saying, okay, I'm Jewish. You've really embraced it, like, and taken on observances. And a lot of people, like in the United States, they're Jewish. They know they're Jewish. They're proud of being Jewish, and it's mostly a cultural thing for them. But you have taken on observances. You've changed the way you're dressing, your beard. That had like, how did that go from? Well, you got my question.
It started off rather slow, actually. But I was under the impression that if you do things, what's the best way to orient myself in the world and in life was to do the things that God asks a person to do. And so if I'm doing things the way that God wants me to do them, acting in the world in a truthful, honest manner, took some responsibility. I learned what it is that God asks us to do and how to do that. And I went to go visit a rabbi. I became very close with him and his family, actually. They're the ones who sent me off to yeshiva.
They sent you to yeshiva? Okay.
Yeah, but to kind of digress back to my point, is I figured that if I do everything in a truthful manner and in the way that God wants me to do it, then I can't really go wrong. And so I had to learn what that actually was and what it is that he wanted me to do. And because as far as I could tell, like the two choices I had were between this notion of kind of just wandering around in the dark, trying to figure things out, or this thing that's true and eternal and what's real, and let that guide and orient me in my life. And on this side, maybe I get it, maybe I don't. On this side, I for sure get it.
And what is this? What is eternal and real?
God. But that's not a very sufficient answer, I recognize.
But okay, so God. But so you said, I'm going to go learn about God.
Yes.
And you chose to learn about God. How?
Just first started going for Shabbat. Shabbat is very central. I liked the family dynamics that my rabbi and his family had oriented.
I'm just going to pause. Say Shabbat for people that don't know is well, why don't you say briefly what Shabbat is?
Shabbat is the time to connect, where everything slows down and stops for a second, and you reconnect it to the way that the world should be. That is a God.
It's the sixth night, Friday night, and then the seventh day. And there's often a Friday night dinner, a Shabbat dinner. Women light candles, say prayers. Everyone says prayers. Okay, so you start going to his home. I think you said we were talking a little last night when we were having dinner together with my son and you. You were saying something about the 1 hour drive each way? Yeah,
so the closest Orthodox rabbi to me is 45 minutes to an hour away.
From where you lived in the high desert?
Yes. And so I would make the trip out to him every single Shabbat.
Well, let's just give him a shout out.
Yeah.
Who was this rabbi?
So his name is Rabbi Shmuel Fuss. He's an amazing man. If you're feeling kind enough and want to give charity, feel free to reach out to me and I will go ahead, or her, and I will get the information. Because he's out there changing the world and doing great.
And where is he? What town is he in?
He's in Riverside, California. Okay. So that's also in Southern California.
Now I also remember you said it was a huge turning point. I can remind you, unless you remember, it was something about what he said.
Yes.
Okay, I love it.
How could I forget?
So
this was a turning point because I was still figuring out do I actually believe that there's a real God, not just some sort of ethereal like story, archetypal type idea, but actually is there a God? So I was kind of tiptoeing my way figuring that out.
1 minute, this is the big aha, right?
Yeah, so he's giving this
rabbi.
Yeah, this course through the Jewish Learning Institute on prayer, and he invited me to do it, to attend as his guest for free, probably just to get me in the door and to come more often. And we're going through this course, and he's bringing up this idea of angels and prayer and connecting. I'm like, well, this is beyond my scope of practice. Like, I'm not sure how much I really believe in God yet. I can't do angels. Like, this is too much. I don't get this. But I stick with the course, and halfway through the course, he asks everybody a question, which was, what is the best way to love God? And people are smart. There's doctors, lawyers, accountants, and all the stereotypical stuff that Jewish people find themselves in, like everybody's there. And they say, well, it's a prayer class. It's a class on prayer. So praying to God, that's the best way to love God. And he's like, well, that's very observant of you, but no, that's not the best way. So they say, learning Torah. He's like, well, obviously you guys are learning Torah, but that's not the right way either. That's not the best way. It's not the right way. It's the best way.
It's not the best way.
Yeah, it's not the best way. They're like, okay, doing mitzvot. She's like, you're all doing the mitzvot. That's not the best way, though. That's too obvious. And they're like, okay, what is it? He's like, the best way to love God is to love another person. We're all created in the form of God, in God's image. And when you hate a person, when you don't act in a manner that's good to another person, it's as if you're spitting in the face of God himself.
Spitting in the face of God.
Yeah. And so I was like, aha! I don't know about this angel stuff. I don't know. I'm still figuring out God, but I want that relationship and working in that direction. I can do that.
Wow.
I'm like, that's perfect.
Wow.
And so I stuck with it.
Wow. So that was like the turning point where you're like, okay, I'm in. I'm putting
Yeah.
my cards on the table, my chips on the table. I'll
Yeah.
give this a try.
I'm like, I'm taking the risk. I'll do it. So how do I do that? And so he lays it out. He just tells you, like, don't do this, do this. I want you to do this.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
This has been wonderful. Is there anything you want to add before we stop?
Yeah, Judaism's awesome.
Judaism is awesome. Okay.
Yeah, come to My Notes. My Notes a wonderful place to learn.
I second that.
Yes. So yeah,
Mayanot Institute
of Jewish Studies.
of Jewish Studies in
Where
Jerusalem.
you're at, they're very good at finding where a person's at. And they're very sensitive to a person's where they're holding in their life and how to communicate with that person. And so even if you're not looking to be the most observant person in the world, but you want to have a deeper appreciation of Judaism and your culture and your tradition or where you come from and who you really are, My Notes hands down the best ways to do it.
And I actually happen to have gone because my son goes to Mayanot. He inspired me, so I went to the 3-week program for people that are not 20 to 30, and it was amazing. Now, before we stop, Yaakov, can you just come here and we can say hello on camera?
Hey guys, Yaakov.
And you want to add anything?
Tomer is awesome, and so is my mother.
Thank you, Jacob.
Both amazing people. So much greater than you guys get to see.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me be the first person you interview.
It was great.
Yeah, it was
And now
fun.
we're going to eat dinner.
Yes.
Yaakov? Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Signing
Bye, guys.
off.
Have a good one.